Hey guys, welcome to the Wild Pet Show. I'm Meghna,
And I'm Upamanyu.
and we've got a special show planned for you. This is episode 52, which means Wild Pets has taken one trip around the sun. Yes, one glorious year of covering current topics in the wildlife world. Talking about everything current, in today's episode, we have a panel discussion on a very important topic: conservation in times of war. As we all know, war has devastating impacts on humans and their livelihoods, but their impact on wildlife and the environment is often overlooked. During times of war, when even human rights can come under threat, concerns for wildlife and animal welfare are often to the margins. Yet, amid conflict and chaos, there are remarkable individuals who refuse to let nature become another casualty. Today, we are privileged to be joined by an extraordinary panel of experts from across the globe who have worked in war torn regions, often at great personal risk, to ensure that wildlife is not overlooked during these perilous times. Their work is a testament to courage, compassion, and resilience, and their stories remind us that protecting the natural world remains vital even in humanity's darkest hours. Please join us in welcoming and saluting these unsung heroes as we introduce our distinguished panelists. First, we have Alexandra Youssef, Executive Director and co founder of the NGO Lebanese Wildlife and Lebanon's first wildlife rehabilitator. With over a decade of experience in wildlife rescue, rehabilitation, and conservation, Alexandra leads initiatives focused on wildlife protection, education, research, and advocacy. Despite Lebanon's economic collapse and the challenges of war, she continues to rescue and protect wildlife, often putting her own safety at risk. Next, we welcome Christopher R. Day, Professor of Political Science at the College of Charleston. His research focuses on political violence, civil military relations, state power in Africa, insurgencies, armed groups, and the politics of wildlife conservation. A former humanitarian aid worker with Medicine Sans Frontiers, he is the author of The Fates of African Rebels and co editor of Rethinking Civil Military Relations in Africa Beyond the d'etat. His work has examined the militarization of park rangers across Africa and whether it has led to improved conservation outcomes. Joining us as well today is Hannah L. Timmins, a conservation and rewilding ecologist with an interdisciplinary background in landscape scale conservation planning and management. Her research spans forest conservation, building trust between park rangers and local communities, and strategies to protect 30% of inland waters by 2030. More, more recently, she has documented the impacts of the war in Ukraine on the country's protected areas, highlighting the often overlooked consequences of armed conflict on biodiversity and ecosystems. Finally, we have Svetlana Kudrenko, a researcher with the Faculty of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Freiburg, Germany. Her work focuses on duration links, Russian brown bears, and gray wolves, with particular emphasis on how armed conflict alters wildlife behavior. In 2020, she and her team established camera traps in the Chernobyl exclusion zone to study wildlife populations and were uniquely positioned to document and analyze changes in animal activity following Russia's brief occupation of the area in 2022. Um, Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Um, knowing how dangerous this work can be, we would like to start by asking our panelists who worked in war zones and active conflict areas, what inspired you to take on this work despite the risk to your own safety, and what kept you going when the dangers were so immediate and personal?
And we can start with probably Alexandra. You can probably share your experience and how it led to this work, how your life has led to this work.
Well, let me start by saying that I did not choose this. That's not what I signed up for. Um, so we started in a country where wildlife was completely out of topic. No one was thinking about wildlife. Most of the people here don't even know that we have wildlife in Lebanon. And humans barely have their basic needs in this country. And um, unfortunately, things kept getting worse and worse with corruption, with the collapse of the economy, and then ended up with war, obviously. And we ended up in a situation where we had to continue what we are doing, but on a different scale where we are not sure if we will be surviving the next day or not. So it happened by not by choice. We would rather be somewhere else doing working with wildlife, of course, but not in such situations because it's not really fine. Working with wildlife is as its own uh, it causes burnout on its own. It causes so much stress. So add to it all of these external things. It magnifies all of these emotions, unfortunately.
Mm. What about you, Chris? No, your microphone is gone again.
Okay. Hannah, could you tell us till Chris's microphone starts working?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Well, I've always been very fortunate to be based in quite safe areas, but countries that are bordering countries that are in conflict. I'm currently living in Istanbul, which is super safe, but obviously very close to regions of conflict. But the first time I kind of got involved in this work, I went to visit Kyiv about a year into the Ukraine invasion and got to see firsthand and meet some of the incredible conservationists and ecologists like Alexandra that did not start off by doing this, were completely normal ecologists doing regular biological field work just a year before, and they found themselves in situations like my colleague Katerina Polyanska, who found herself going from being a regular ecologist to profiling, coming up with methodologies to profile soil samples taken from explosion craters and working out what heavy metals and chemicals are in those soils in her homeland. So for me, it was just a very inspirational summer spent in Kyiv, speaking to people that are working directly on the front lines of the invasion there, and just feeling very inspired by those colleagues and wanting to support in whatever way I could.
Okay, amazing. Chris, is your microphone working now?
Let's try. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Thank goodness. Okay, well, first of all, sorry for that. Second of all, thanks for welcoming me on. So the short answer to the question, how did I find myself in conflict zones, is before becoming an academic, I was an aid worker for Doctors Without Borders, also known as Médecins Sans Frontières, and I worked in quite a few conflict zones in Africa and South Asia. So it was almost like kind of a comfortable place, I guess, for me to do field work as a scholar. And the wildlife thing, I'd always been interested in wildlife my entire life, since I was a child. And I was doing field work for my dissertation on a rebel group called the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda. And I was there with my young family at the time. And of course, we went on a game drive in this wonderful place called Murchison Falls National Park. And it's one of these protected areas that actually harbored armed groups like the Lord's Resistance Army during the height of the Civil War. So I found myself just talking to park rangers about their experiences as sort of the auxiliary members of the counterinsurgency campaign against the LRA, and how they balance their roles as law enforcement officers, as conservationists, and as what I learned, they call themselves sister forces to the military. So that's when I became interested in wildlife politics, particularly the militarization of conservation, which you see in all sorts of protected areas around the world. And now I'm a little bit older. I'm not particularly interested in working in active conflict zones anymore. So right now, this is just my effort to try to hang around in protected areas and go on safari masquerading as a political science researcher. That's my main goal right now.
Okay, amazing. And Svetlana, your thoughts on the same?
But I wasn't working in the area when the Russians were there, so I guess it's a bit exaggerated. And I also worked with the local researchers. I didn't have a team, and I asked to correct that in the description, but somehow it got missed. So I collaborated with the researchers at the Biosphere Reserve in Chernobyl Biosphere Reserve, and we did a few camera trap studies since 2020. They were part of my PhD, and then the invasion started, and fortunately, with the help of the armed forces, Ukrainian armed forces, after the reoccupation, we obtained the equipment. I also did some research afterwards, after I finished my PhD in the excluded zone, but that's a different story, and the data have not been analyzed yet.
Ah,
And honestly, I wish there was no such data, and I just completed my links monitoring in the area. That's it.
oh, okay, yes. War can be very sudden and surprising, to say the least. Um, but talking about how war is a stressful time for humans, animals, and the environment, as a conservationist or a researcher, is there any training provided? Like, has there been any training provided to any of you to help survive the war while researching the animals? Like, is there, yeah, like any
Or
kind
or
of
I think expanding on that as well, like, have you done the same for someone else entering the field? If you didn't weren't in a position to receive that sort of a training or sort of a briefing while um, entering this sort of field of work, because as sort of Alexandra and Svetlana highlighted that this wasn't a deliberate choice. Yeah, maybe we can start with Alexandra again.
It's a very funny question. I don't think it's something that you can actually train others to be like, hey, yeah, today you're going on a rescue and you might need rescuing as well. So it's very hard to train. Of course, on a normal day, we go through risk reduction protocols, we go through how they need to be doing everything properly, but we are learning everything based on what the situation is, which day it is. So definitely there's no training whatsoever. There's not even support from governmental entities. We work in a place where, as I said before, human basic needs are not met, and wildlife and everything related to conservation is pushed to the side, to the entire different section of the country. So there is no such thing. We're learning step by step. We're learning together. The training that we give to our members or to our volunteers, it's the basics of the basics, and we try to handle the situations as much as possible personally, because we know that the responsibility is huge. We're in a country where we also have rabies, but there's no rabies shots or rabies vaccines. So imagine such a simple thing is not actually tackled by the government. So imagine something as wildlife conservation during war. So,
and so is there like has there been situations, like you said, like vaccines or maybe even first aid? Has there been situations where you needed that and didn't have access to that, or your team needed that and didn't have access to that? If you can share some, if there has been such cases.
Yeah, basically, just me and a few team members are vaccinated against rabies, and the rest are not. So
Mm.
sometimes, especially during war, when you're limited to the areas that you can access, if there's a jackal or a hyena or wolf that needs rescuing, and I'm not able to reach that area because of what's happening, I cannot send just any members, even if they are close, because they are not vaccinated. So we the fortunately none of my members got bit or anything, but we have known that there's a huge number of humans that did catch rabies and die of it this year, specifically with war coming in, because everything zoonotic is now um, being also showing up in more and more areas, unfortunately.
Mm.
Oh.
And I think
Um,
Svetlana would like to hear from you as well, because yeah, again, we've worked in conflict zones, so yeah, maybe you can share your thoughts.
Well, I sort of took safety quite seriously even before the invasion started. So we did have those first aid kits and so on. And then before the invasion, there was some sort of military trainings for civilians in early February 2022. So I participated, of course. And yeah, so afterwards, after the invasion, I took the tactical first aid course and refreshed again before going to the field last year. So that's basically what I did, and I guess that is probably like such courses are definitely a necessity to do, and as well as to get a proper tactical first aid kit, which I still don't have. I mean, I have some components, but I don't have the fancy components that cost quite a lot. But at least stopping the bleeding and sort of basic first aid stuff. That's something we do have. In addition to that, there were some courses, but of course they were quite brief and not very informative for people who work in areas with the danger of um, encountering unexploded ordnance and landmines. And for instance, people in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, they did participate in such courses. I also had some brief training, but that's basically it. So I guess the most you can do is to keep your first aid kit, the first aid skills sharp and refreshed. Otherwise, of course, well, there are dangers, but at least we don't. There are no FPV drones flying there, unlike along the front line. So there isn't such sort of regular danger in the area, at least not yet. In terms of unexploded ordnance, well, you have to be careful, but we didn't have those the equipment to test to scan the busway or the tracks that we were planning to follow, which would probably be nice. But the issue with the warfare ecology or any type of research linked to war impacted areas is, I guess, lack of funding. At least that was my experience. So, and in order to get all that fancy equipment to secure the safety at maximum, you need funding. And yeah, because conservation organizations are not very willing to risk their funding for research that may end up um, in some, not even casualties, but there is a risk that you will not collect anything, or there is a risk that you will not get the result you would like to get. So, conservation organizations are also trying to sell like nice stories and good news. So at least that was my experience. So
uh,
in order to secure the safety at maximum, you need quite a lot of funding. So, but the minimum you can do is first aid kits and first and safety courses.
um, Alexandra has a question for you, Svetlana. She is asking if these courses were funded by the government.
Sorry,
Alexandra,
I didn't hear it properly.
Alexandra is asking
Yeah, but what exactly?
if these trainings are offered by the government.
Oh no, for heaven's sake, no. I paid them from the funding that I received. Of course, there are some sort of cheap courses, like 1 day course, and then you donate for a specific battalion or you donate for paramedics. So you make a donation. Those sort of 1 day courses or 1 evening courses, I also took part. I also participated in such courses and got those sort of small certificates. But if you are talking about 1, 2 day courses or 1 week course, then you obviously need to pay, and the government was not funding such courses unless you're, hired by the government. But even with that, those people did not receive like, extensive courses. So something relatively brief. That's what they can pay, at least what I hear. So in order to get enough knowledge, I had to pay from the funding that I received for the project.
Wow. Oh, okay. And Chris, you wanted to add in on the trainings bit?
Yeah. So, when I started as a researcher, I had already been an aid worker for 10 years, like I said, and I got operational security training with MSF, and I was in charge of managing security for a variety of teams and a variety of projects. But, when you leave academia, so when you leave aid work and you get trained as a PhD student, nobody is training you in security management. And so oftentimes as a scholar, or as a young junior scholar, you end up going into insecure environments. I had the comparative advantage of having worked in these environments before, but most academics do not have any formal training in operational security management unless they have a background in aid work or the military. They're going in there very, very naive,
Prepared.
and the other thing is that most academic institutions put pretty tight restrictions on where researchers can go. I mean, there's no way any of us are getting approval from our institutions to be able to go to an active conflict zone. So that's all because of the liability level of things, but it's not just that. So there's a big difference between practitioners and scholars. So Svetlana has been very lucky that she's had all this experience, and Alexandra's a practitioner, and that's quite different for those of us that actually have to get approval by ethics research boards before we go anywhere. And so when we go to the field, it's not just about operational security management. We have to balance that between research methods and research ethics and how all these things can conflict with each other. And even if you're not working in an active conflict zone, a lot of times we find ourselves working in an authoritarian zone, right? These authoritarian settings where park rangers are armed state actors with arresting authority, and sometimes these governments don't like foreign researchers meddling around and poking around in their affairs. So these are things that, in terms of training for scholars, we have a long way to go before we can comfortably say that we're preparing people to do this types of research.
Mm.
And Hannah, what has your experience been when you went to Kyiv?
Well, actually, I wanted to talk a little bit more about coming from the other side of things, about developing training or good practices or support guides for those working in conflict zones. So I'm a member of the Universal Ranger Support Alliance. I'm the representative of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's World Commission on Protected Areas in the Universal Ranger Support Alliance, and I work very closely with the International Ranger Federation. And one thing we're doing as a team is to put together a support system, a support guide for rangers and mental health. We know that conflict disproportionately hits areas of high biodiversity. And war really also takes its toll on conservation budgets. It strips conservation budgets from government, from state budgets, and it reduces human resources, equipment, infrastructure, vehicles. So, of course, countries that are in conflict are really struggling to support the rangers that they can keep in protected areas. Many of the rangers are drafted, like we know in Ukraine, many of the rangers were drafted. Many of them had to flee their areas. The ones that did stay were often targeted as being the only state representatives left in these rural zones. And we heard pretty horrific examples, pretty horrific reports of detentions, of torture, and even of executions in some situations, which was horrific to hear. But of course, the rangers that survive these situations are often struggling with mental health issues. I have colleagues also that work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's been really recently an attack on the Opemba National Park. Rangers, 7 rangers died there in the attack. So there's a huge need for more support for ranger mental health, and that's a gap that we're trying to fill at the moment. And I was wondering from you guys, actually, I wanted to ask a question to my co-panelists. If, of course, that's just ranger mental health, and you all have spoken much more about operational health and safety. And I'm just wondering if you think there is a need for more support for rangers that are operating in conflict zones in terms of health and safety, and what that might actually look like. I'd be really interested to hear from my panelists.
Cool. Any one of you, if you want to weigh in, any one of you can go.
I can say a couple of things. So maybe you're familiar with the work by a guy named Will Moretto.
Oh yeah,
Have you ever
Will
heard of him?
Moretto. Yeah, he's
Yeah. So he's done a bunch of really interesting stuff on the psychological impact of being on these front lines in these unstable conservation zones. He does a lot of. We co-authored something actually, so I got to know his work a little bit. But for me, like. Let's say, for example, we go and we want to find out whatever we want to find out, and we interview rangers. To what extent are we asking them questions that re-traumatize them? Right? We start poking around in their heads and wanting to know what their experiences were in working in these environments. To what extent are we breaching basic research ethics with human subjects and subjecting them to telling these stories in ways that exacerbate their mental health issues? That's a conversation we should be having in the communities of scholars that study rangers and conservation.
Mm.
And
also like to I would like to answer also. I think before training physically for such stuff, especially in Lebanon, mentally being prepared to such conflicts is also very important. So what I learned through those last 2 years where we were in a very active war zone, still are, our judgment gets very distorted. Our psychology and how we think about stuff is completely different than how we usually do it on a normal day. So I work with rescue and rehabilitation. So usually my priority is getting that animal to safety into my care to be able to treat it and start with the rehab process. So sometimes when we're getting this rush of okay, there's this hyena that's injured in South Lebanon in a very active war zone, and we're trying to see if we can go or if we cannot go, usually that gets dismissed. And our goal is just let's get that animal into our care. So you see us driving into that war zone, and then we just stopped on the side of the road and we're like, what did I just do? We're like, where am I? Why am I doing this? And I did this with a fox that had an entire building collapse on him and his family, and he was the only survivor from that batch. So I didn't think twice. I drove to that area. I didn't tell my husband where I'm going because I knew like he would he would not accept. Same for my parents. This is something that you have to hide basically because we are not in a very stable place. And once I drove there, I was like, yes, I can do it. And then reaching that area and looking around and seeing everything destroyed, and you're like, is this worth it? But then you're like, yes, it is. Let me get him out of here and let's go. And then you drive and drive, and then you realize that you're not taking any breath and you're just holding your breath the entire time. And then reaching to your center, and you're like, okay, like we're both safe, but that is not okay. Like we've done that so many times. And then we realized that, okay, that was maybe not the best decision that we did. And then we keep on doing it again because our goal is to get those animals in care. So we know for a fact after the things are done, we know that our judgment of things is not being in the right place. Sometimes our passion drives those fears away, but then it hits you in the most horrible way possible. So we've had so many times where we were, it was getting targeted, and we know that it's gonna get targeted by just a text message that, okay, you are 50 meters away of that area that's gonna be hit. So you just stand there and you're like, do I have time to run? Do I have time to pick up all the animals and leave? So yeah, mentally it kind of destroys your logic, if I can may say. And I don't know if there's any training that can get you through all of this mental state. I'm not sure if that is offered anywhere. I'm willing to pay $1 million just to get that.
Wow.
Um,
But
I think one of the things I think Svetlana also mentioned is sort of the funding side of things. And I think the next sort of topic or question that we were very interested in this, is that obviously, government funding can be few and far between, as I sort of get from you guys. But are there like NGOs, or is there situations where you personally or people in this space have sort of reutilized maybe research funding for this kind of work, or specifically try to research in these areas so that the animals can be cared for and saved? Just wanted to get an idea from you guys around that as well. Maybe we can start with Christopher if you have any thoughts.
Sure. So in the United States right now, there is not a lot of opportunities to get research funding because of the politicization of academia.
Mm.
Sorry, let me do the disclaimer. I'm about to say something about politics right now. I was asked to do that. So I've got a grant out there in the world. I'm waiting for. I'm not expecting to get it. It's from the National Science Foundation, and it's one of the big buckets of money that you can draw on. But in the last year, there's been a deliberate effort to cut out certain types of research. So anything involved, like a few years ago, anything that if you wanted to say, if you said climate change, you have a high likelihood of getting money. And now there's this informal list that got circulated about words that you should not put into grant proposals. And like peanut allergy, women, history, institution. And so I wrote this proposal, and I'm really nervous about it because I'm looking at the Virunga area between Congo, Rwanda, and Uganda. It's literally called a transboundary conservation area. And I don't want to get rejected because I say the word trans in it. And this is where we are. This is where we are. And so I think for the moment, it doesn't look very promising. In terms of what wildlife organizations are out there funding this types of research, boy, oh boy, if you know of any, let me know, because that would be great. I still need to investigate that. To to make up for the shortfalls of institutional funding. And periodically, if you're working at a big research university, they're usually pretty good with funding this type of research. But these days, the country I study, Uganda, is currently closed for Ebola, so I can't go there anytime soon. So there's a lot of weird political restrictions on research funding, at least in my world.
Mm. And I think Svetlana, you mentioned sort of touched on funding side of things. I think would like to hear from you as well.
Svetlana, can you hear us? Oops, is she still connected?
Yes, she's. Maybe we can hear from Alexandra if you have any thoughts.
Anybody? Yeah.
Anybody, yeah. But Alexandra, if you have any thoughts.
Sure. Well, I do lead a wildlife organization, and unfortunately, I can tell you that it's been 8 years and we've never had any sort of funding. When Lebanon lies in the Middle East, and there's this idea that the Middle East is wealthy and there's a lot of money that goes in and there's a lot of funding. The thing is that Lebanon is very, very separate from all of these countries, and we're in our little hole of nothing. So there's no funding whatsoever. And plus, we've been in this instability for a decade. So it's not something that's new. So when you want to study anything or get funding for any research, you need some sort of timeline or roadmap that you can move with. And unfortunately, in Lebanon, there you have years of data that are getting lost every couple of years. So whatever researchers are working on, the data gets removed because that area gets completely vanished. So it gets very, very difficult. It becomes much harder to even separate the impact from one another. So we're just losing information, and we're just adding another layer of uncertainty to the ecosystems that we are still trying to understand, basically. So we as any country, we're going through climate change, pollution, habitat loss, some invasive species, diseases that are already affecting biodiversity. But when war interrupts research and monitoring, it becomes even harder to understand what is driving the changes that we see and how best to respond. So if you want to write a proposal about anything, it's completely difficult, as you might think.
Mm. Mm. And did you have any thoughts, Hannah?
I think, sadly, I do not have any better news to offer than my colleagues did. Or everywhere we look, the funding is scarce. I mean, the paper that I did with my Ukrainian colleagues, I did for free. So it's not. I don't know of any magic pots of funding that we can all tap into for this, but we do need much more research on conflict and conservation. We need to know. We need an update on what the impacts of invasions are, of war is on conservation, on the conservation estate worldwide. We need a major update on the Ukrainian one. The paper that we did was 2023, so a lot has changed since then. And we need to understand what the impacts are on the operational landscape of conservation as well, what the impacts are on the human resources, on the rangers that are doing this work, on the equipment, on the infrastructure. And what the losses are there and what we need to be restoring and looking to the future to improve and build back. But I do also wonder whether or not we need to tie this to budgets that are allocated to the economic restoration of the countries that are currently in conflict landscapes, and making sure that conservation and ecosystem restoration is integrated thoroughly in plans to restore the economy and the communities of those countries as well, because I think it's very easy. We all know that it's so easy to forget biodiversity. It's so easy to put ecology to one side and focus only on people, which is obviously critical, and that's our primary focus on anything like this. It's very easy to focus on climate. Well, it's getting harder to focus on climate. But biodiversity is always put to the back. Ecology, ecosystems are always put to the back of the pile. And I think it's really critical that we try to make the connection as researchers between ecosystem health and community health, particularly around, like we talked about mental health, but particularly around mental health and surviving conflicts, because people are going to need wild spaces to restore and to replenish and to reinvigorate as communities. So I think, and of course, this also goes back to just cleanliness and ecosystem functioning. And when you've got ecosystems that have been torn apart by war, they need to restore, just to restore the ecosystem services as well. So I think we as researchers really need to make this connection very clear, and perhaps start to look at tying these things to budgets, to the restoration of economy and community for these countries.
Yeah, I think that is like a very heavy topic. But when the war situations get better and there are donations that come in from other countries, do the donations ever reach the wildlife conservation and the ecology bit, or are all the donations only do they go only towards recovering or rebuilding the human settlements? And anyone is free to answer. Anyone is free to answer that.
I can share something that's very frustrating. It's either for humanitarian aid, which is not a lot, but mostly it's for domestics. So people see cats and dogs, and there's this flood of of funds for that. And wildlife, people do not connect to wildlife as they connect to domestics, so they don't really care as much. So we're seeing that with funding, just the same. So much for shelters and for cats and dogs, nothing basically for wildlife, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone else has any thoughts on this?
In our case in Ukraine, why are people so sure the war will end soon? Maybe it will not end for like years to come. And that is a scenario that is quite often ignored by the conservation organizations. And let's say in 2022, I was hearing constantly, oh, it will end up soon. Oh, it will end up soon. Just a little to wait. No, it's going to last for years. Maybe the less active form, it will take a less active form at some point in order to become more active later. So, and that scenario seems to be totally ignored. Like everyone hopes it will end at some point, and then we have to plan what to do. What if it doesn't end? And it will take years and years, and we have to basically adapt to working in a constant war zone.
Something to add.
I think social media is not also shedding enough light on this. So I don't know if you know anything about Lebanon, but right now we are in a ceasefire. We are not. So everywhere on social media, everyone thinks that the war has stopped, but the hotspot of biodiversity is where there's still active bombing on a daily basis, hundreds of times. So, but to my friends that are living abroad, they're like, "Oh, hey, congratulations! There's ceasefire." We're like looking around, like, "No, what do you mean?" But so yeah, on social media, it's not really reflecting the reality of what's happening. Unfortunately, whether it's here or in Ukraine or anywhere, I'm sure.
I can add something to this.
Sure.
So some of the work that my friend Adrian Garside and I did on South Sudan it sort of speaks to this a little bit, because back in 2005, when there was a peace agreement that ended the war between the North and the South, there was this transition period where there was quite a lot of interest taken in South Sudan from international wildlife organizations, where in their past there really hadn't been a lot. and one of this, because right now South Sudan boasts the world's largest mammal migration of the white-eared cob, and there's all these national parks and game reserves that have been there since the colonial period. But there was quite a lot of effort to fund the wildlife service. But one of the things that we learned was the wildlife service in many of these countries does not exist independently from the rest of the government security apparatus. That wildlife authorities are one in a range of armed state actors that governments and regimes use to project power over space, for better or for worse. And in the case of South Sudan, there was a bit of an influx of money, but how that money is allocated usually ends up prioritizing the more traditional security forces like the military, and park rangers and wildlife authorities end up being auxiliaries of the military, which is usually used for domestic political control. And so I get what you're saying, that we can put resources into efforts to facilitate the transition to post conflict conservation. But a lot of these governments that are controlling these resources don't see wildlife authorities as necessarily conservation organizations. They see them as auxiliary regime security organizations. And sometimes they might do some conservation stuff too, at least in the case of South Sudan. So we should pay attention to the political economy of how these regimes view conservation, and any resources that are committed to these good ideas of post-conflict reconstruction of conservation don't get misused or reallocated.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think the next question or the next sort of topic that we have is sort of segueing well into that. And by the way, just adding here, if we don't ask every question to direct every question to every one of you, it's not us being rude. It's just depending on your backgrounds, we have noted something down. But feel free to answer, or send us a text if you want to answer. At any given point of time. The next sort of area that we wanted to ask about is like Chris mentioned, has there been any sort of workarounds or intelligent, I guess, ways that researchers and conservationists have that researchers and conservationists have tried to figure the situation out or help the animals in this case, and the environment in this case, in maybe skirting around all the red tape and regulations. Yeah, Alexandra, maybe.
Unfortunately, there's a will for everything. One of the programs of Lebanese Wildlife is to do research and to fill the data gaps that we have in the country. But we cannot study something if we cannot have access to those areas. And unfortunately, it's been in a constant, non-stop active war zone everywhere. So every place where we need to be studying those animals, it's not happening. We have also had an incident where we had trap cams in north of Lebanon where nothing supposedly is happening, and we had people remove them, or military remove the trap cams for security reasons. So this disrupts everything. And due to the conflict that we're having in our country, even the simplest things, let's say if we want to do post-release monitoring for our animals that we rehabbed and released, if we put a tracking collar on one of our animals, this is a death sentence. So there's a lot of people who think, oh, okay, he has something, so this means he's tracking us, or there's cameras, or so. A simple tracking collar that would monitor an animal would be a reason why he would be firstly targeted and be killed. The same for birds. We got so many birds migrating throughout Lebanon, and if we have anything that even the slightest tag or GPS locator, that's the first bird that will be shot in Lebanon, because they would think that it's a spy or it's used by other countries to spy on us. So post-release monitoring is incredibly hard, which is a huge part of the research, especially for an NGO that gets thousands of animals into their care. So that alone is very frustrating, unfortunately. So just think about other ways that we can do some research, and it's still very, very difficult in so many areas. Whether there's war or not, there's a lot of areas that are inaccessible for humans, and you think it's fine, and then you just hike for a couple of kilometers, and then someone will be like, "You need to get out of here because it's restricted area." Yeah.
Svetlana, you've done some camera trapping and some innovative things around that. Any thoughts on that?
I was not working with animals sort of in an invasive fashion. So I was not. I was just, putting equipment into the woods, and that's basically it, and collecting some samples once in a while. Well, I guess Alexandra has more or less covered the topic, so I don't really think I have much to add, except for the fact that, yeah, that's rather complicated to convince the authorities to get to the area, and yes, without any access, even if you use remotely operated methods, remotely operated techniques, you still need to get closer to the area, and quite often it's not that easy. And particularly for those who are, let's say, foreigners, you do need to get locals, and in order to get locals, you need to fully understand what they are capable of and if they can be trusted, because what is also quite often happening is that, okay, a fancy foreigner comes and needs some data. Okay, let's give him or her some data, and how much do the data collected reflect what is actually happening on the ground? That is the question. So it's possible to collect some sort of some data that not necessarily reflect the reality, and how to avoid that. That is, an open question. You have to be aware of that once you work in an area that is difficult to access.
And
Right.
Chris,
I can chime in here. I can chime in. Yeah. So I think, just to repeat your question, you're asking, what is the potential for sort of cross pollination of research to become applied, in the service of conservation. And I've had some mixed experiences with this. So on one hand, I was able to publish this article with Adrian. He's a practitioner. I'm a nerdy scholar. We had so much fun doing this together, and I don't know whether or not it's actually moving the needle in South Sudan, but I can say that I have observed some very weird turf battles between scholarly communities. Like there's the social scientists that study some of this stuff, and then there's the practitioners and the sort of the hardcore conservation science people, and there's not a lot of love between them from what I've seen, and I don't know why. And the other thing is like, even within social science communities, there's these academic food fights that go on between their little silos of approaches. I'll give you an example. So I'm happy to share this article. Somebody wrote an article. There's a group of scholars that came out last year, and it was claiming that doing this type of research on conservation, militarized conservation, they're experiencing what they called epistemic violence. And what they mean by that, by the way, I'm saying something political about a bunch of people, but I won't say anybody's names. They're saying epistemic violence, which basically means about sort of the extinguishing of knowledge and marginalizing knowledge and communities that produce the knowledge. And they were saying that, well, they come across conservation scholars that maybe they're mean to them, or they're bullies. And they also tell stories about how they go into countries and they might get not treated very well by state authorities. And so we published the response, me and a group of people, and our main thing was like, wait a second, let's stop calling every disagreement violence, first of all, because we are having a conversation on this podcast about actual conflict zones where actual violence occurs. So let's not diminish that by calling disagreement violence. This debate that's happening inside conservation scholarship right now is basically over how we disagree with each other. And my own view is that robust disagreement is also always very healthy, and we shouldn't confuse criticism or peer review or methodological disagreement with actual violence. Real violence exists in many of these places we're studying, and so I think we should preserve that distinction. But the other thing kind of goes back to our discussion earlier about training. If you're going to an authoritarian country and you don't know how to navigate an authoritarian field and do research there, that's kind of on you. You don't blame state authorities for behaving like state authorities and call it epistemic violence. And so we were trying to point out that, whoa, you're conflating all these things. And the deeper point I'm making is, I love methodological pluralism. I would love to see a day where social scientists and conservation scientists could walk hand in hand through the meadow and come up with some kind of grand strategy for addressing these issues. But I've sort of been disappointed by these petty scholarly turf battles that I've seen, and I've participated in them as well.
Talking about navigating through the different issues, this might not be particularly very targeted towards you, Chris, but as a woman, how difficult is it for you to navigate conservation in these difficult times? Do you see it being equally difficult for both the genders, or do you see any discrepancies as a woman when you have to face issues or take up wildlife conservation challenges?
Hannah, maybe you can start.
I mean, three of us on this call are women, and for my paper, at least, it was majority women. So I have to say, from my experience, amazingly, conflict and conservation there seems to be a lot of women in this field. That's my experience. I haven't had any issues as a woman in this working in this particular area of conservation.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, that's not very recordable for your podcast, though. But
no, it's great because
it is great.
That there are fields where women don't have to feel like they have to always fight it out, right? So it's great to have that view
perspective
as well. Yeah.
And so anything to add, like Svetlana or Alexandra?
Well, I have a lot to add on this topic.
All right.
Yeah, Hannah, you are so lucky to have women on your because because here it's the complete opposite. With even if it's the simple things like I work with rescue. If I'm going to just to relocate a snake from someone's house, they would be like, you're doing that? Like, are you sure? Like, do you need like? It's always this double take that, oh, you're here to catch that hyena, or you're here to do that. And it's very frustrating, even coming from other women as well. Mostly it comes from other women where they would want a guy to show up to do the rescue and not me. And I'm like, dude, I'm the one that trains those guys to do this. What do you mean? And it's never taken well, unfortunately. And when it comes to conservation part and research part, there's a lot of, unfortunately, it's the men that are leading this when it comes to scholars and the OGs of research, who unfortunately are very old men that refuse to keep on learning. This field needs constant learning, constant education. You can never reach a point where you're like, oh, I know everything. Like, this methodology worked with me in the 80s and I can keep on doing it now. And unfortunately, these are the people that are leading these programs now in universities, unfortunately. So when I try to step in and like, this methodology is a bit outdated, how about we try this way better? And they're like, do you know who I am? I've been working in this field for 20 years. I'm like, I understand, but no, you need to do something differently. Let's discuss it. And usually I am being dismissed just because I'm this woman who's just talking and trying to change the way that they work. So Hannah, good for you. I would gladly move to wherever you are because yeah, it's so frustrating, unfortunately, in this field.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so two differently opposite experiences. Svetlana, any thoughts?
I
Svetlana,
think
hi.
she's facing some technical issues again. Yeah, not the best.
Or or she has a positive take on women, and she felt bad after I said what I said.
No, I don't think we can hear her at all.
No.
Yes.
Svetlana, can you hear us? Can you type in the message if you can hear us?
No, I think
No,
she'll need to
okay.
rejoin. Kingshu can take care of that. We'll hear
Okay.
from her when she's back. I think one of the things Alexandra touched on is sort of this governments being wary of tags or technology or regimes being wary of that. One of the things that we have been reporting on our show regularly is sort of the use of the expanded use of AI in like everyday conservation in terms of maybe analyzing vocalizations or analyzing photographs or analyzing patterns and things like that. Has there been any sort of that influence in this particular sort of influence of AI or usage of AI in this particular area, this niche area of conservation or tracking or anything like that? Yeah, I think this is open to all, but I don't know. Maybe Hannah, you can start if you have any thoughts.
I mean, if we were to do some sort of update on the paper, that I produced with my co-authors in 2023, then I would definitely. I mean, that was obviously right at the nascent point of ChatGPT starting to become a useful tool. I think I would now be using that much more heavily. But again, this is a sort of qualitative literature review, so I'm not sure it's exactly what you're looking for in terms of an answer. But I mean, these AI is very useful for reviewing. Literally, you do have to check it though; it hallucinates a lot still.
Yeah, no, I can give an example. Like we have reported on stories where like an AI powered like a camera, a very basic camera, but AI powered, has been looking at train tracks to see if animals are crossing and just make the trains aware if those animals are crossing so that the appropriate measures can be taken. Similarly, we have reported on a story where AI drones are flying over a shark infested beach to make swimmers or lifeguards aware of sharks in the area or things like that. So has there been any, and that seems very useful where humans cannot be present in conflict areas where AI assisted drone or a buggy or something like that can reach those areas. Have you guys seen any of that being used or proposals of any of that sort of stuff being used in active conflict zones? So that's sort of the question, I guess.
Just before you answer the question, oops, it's not shark infested waters. The waters are where the sharks live. So no, that I had to correct. I'm sorry, but yeah, now you guys can just go ahead and answer. Yeah.
Maybe Chris, if you have any thoughts, or I don't know. If not, that's okay too.
Well, I don't know much about the use of AI for the types of things that you're describing. I would would think that's a great idea, right? I use AI all the time for the types of things that Hannah was describing, sort of organizing, doing meta analysis of literature and things like that, and periodically asking it to simulate fights between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, and ask who would win in a fight between the two of them. And
Who
Yeah.
wins?
Elon Musk, just because of his size.
Fair enough.
Okay. Yes.
Alexandra, do you have any thoughts on that? Or I think still a very new field. So I guess, yeah, if you have any thoughts.
Listen, technically, it's not a very new field. A calculator is AI, if you want to talk technicality. Okay, we just got to a different level of things. And the thing is, I would love to use it more. And I know that it can have so much benefit, but unfortunately, right now, like you were saying, drones is what's being used in war. So there's no way and that we can fly a drone to do anything. It would make you a target. So no. But we know that when it comes to science and monitoring, there's a lot of things like with softwares that are incredible that I wish that researchers here can use. Like you can just take a picture of a footprint and it can tell you if that's the same animal that you released, if it's related to that animal that you have released. There's very simple things that we should be doing, but we are not, even though there are people who are getting some funds on this, but they prefer doing the old school methods and repeating the methods as they are, because they are afraid of AI, or they think that AI is as having a very negative impact on the environment. And I'm not saying that it's not, but we can use it for our benefit and for conservation. Even the simple things as eDNA, just getting I'm sure you're familiar with it, just getting a water sample and getting an entire list of the animals that passed through that water body. And unfortunately, in Lebanon, this is not really being done, even though it can make so much work faster and so much data, and they're not using it. I wish there's funding so I can get all of this into action, but for now, it's a bit out of reach. Yeah.
I think the next question will actually be something that that would be very relevant to Svetlana the most, but she's still refreshing and she's not here. But I'll ask the rest of you this question. Like during your research, and because you were researching on a particular topic, has it ever happened that because of the war there were unexpected discoveries that came to light, like how Svetlana explained that her camera traps were already rolling in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and then when the Russian military came and went, there was a new research that could happen because there was a way to analyze because the camera traps were still there. Were there any other unexpected discoveries for any of you that happened because the war happened? It's open to anyone, like anyone who wants to answer the question.
I can tell you a bit of a disappointing discovery, not related to science, but related to humans and human behavior. You would think when you're in an active war and when you're constantly trying to get like good deeds so you would be safe, you would think that animal abuse or people hurting animals intentionally would be reduced. And unfortunately, we did not see that. We've seen a rise in this, which we do not really understand. Like, if you're trying to be safe, like at least have good karma, you know. And it's not. It's not what people are thinking. So we're seeing more people poaching animals, more people, maybe because there's no laws being applied at the moment because of what's happening, and this is being disregarded. And maybe because they need opportunities to eat or sell those animals for wildlife trafficking, so they can get money. Because right now it's not fine. But in my head, I don't think that this is reasonable. I think that this is the time where we need to have every good deed so we can have good karma in our lives and to survive all of this together. So it was a bit of a shocking discovery to learn that not everyone is having the same mentality. Yeah.
Mm.
Hannah, Chris, any inputs?
One thing that interested me, and I'm still really interested in writing a paper on it, if we can pull it together, is this concept of defensive rewilding, which is quite controversial. But in Ukraine, at least, they have used certain ecosystems, certain natural areas like the swamps north of Kiev to buffer settlements from invasions, which has been fascinating. Like, so it kind of adds an additional value to certain ecosystems that they could be utilized in some way to defend against incurring forces. It's controversial because we don't necessarily want to sort of assimilate or to sort of associate ecosystems and protected areas with defense, and but it is potentially an ecosystem service in and of itself. So I'd be very interested in looking into that more deeply, and the role of protected areas in peacekeeping and the mitigation of like the damages from war before, during, and after invasions. So that's something I'm interested in following up on. But yeah, I will pass over to Christopher.
I don't have anything clever to add.
Cool. Svetlana, if you can hear us now, Meghna, if you can repeat the question for Svetlana.
Yeah, Svetlana, can you hear us?
She's gone again.
Oh man. Okay. Yeah,
It's a really bad day for her laptop, I think.
Yeah, but Hannah, it's very interesting you say that. There was actually one time we covered a news article, and this wasn't much about the war, but it was more about illegal migrants entering. So India and Bangladesh share a border, and there's like a river through which I think the migrants try to cross and come over, and the one of the innovative ways that they tried would have been great to stop the illegal migrants coming in was to introduce crocodiles into the river. And they were actually on purpose introducing crocodiles by saying that that is like an ecological home by
Deterrent.
default for them, yeah, and it would work as a deterrent. So it's kind of what you. It was very very shocking for us. We thought it was a fluff piece, but then we saw that all the newspapers had covered it, and yeah, it was being termed as a conservation win and a win against illegal migrants. So yeah.
So many feelings around that. That's really complicated. I would love to read that article though. I've got a colleague in Istanbul actually that looks at displaced peoples and the use of forests by refugees in this region, in the West Asian region, and I think he'd find that really interesting. If you can send it through, I'd love to read it.
Yeah.
But
We'll send you the link. Yeah,
I'm not sure I like it.
Yeah, this was an official thing proposed, or I think being researched by the Indian Army Border Security Force. So yeah, it was as Meghna said, we thought it was a meme article or something like that, but apparently not. Yeah, I think Svetlana is back. Meghna, if you can repeat the question and ask her, I think it would be great to hear her thoughts.
Yes, Svetlana, are you back?
Yes,
Can you hear us?
I hope so.
Yes, we can hear you. So there was one more question that we wanted to ask you, that how difficult or how easy has it been for you to as a woman in the wildlife ecology world? That was something that Hannah and Alexandra had answered, and they had really opposite experiences. And the question that we're asking right now is, you know how you said that the Canberra traps are already in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. What are kind of the unexpected discoveries that came to light because war had changed your research? Like, what were the new discoveries that you were able to add to your research?
Okay. I first thank you for your question. First, I would like to add to what Hannah said, and please, someone drop a message if you stop hearing me. Okay. About the defensing rewilding, um, uh, I think it's sort of exaggerated that there is rewilding happening as one of the defensive mechanisms. Um, because what Hannah was probably referring to is an explosion of or destruction of a dam across on the river Irpin, which is north to Kiev during the Blitzkrieg attempt. And that was all, because afterwards and in recent years, what was happening along the borders and what was happening in the protected areas along the border with Belarus and Russia, but mainly the border with Belarus, was building barriers, putting barbed wire, military divisions, of course, moved there, and that was what's happening. So nobody was actually flooding the area in order to stop anything. There are such thoughts, there are such talks about so-called war wilding. That's another term that was actually discussed at one of the conferences last week. It is in the air, and a lot of people are debating whether it's worthy or not. But you can look at the Belovesia forest in Poland. That is probably the only area, as long as I know, where they actually think about implementing something like that. But in Ukraine, I am not really aware of any attempts, except for this destruction of a dam in northern Kiev region during the Blitzkrieg attempt. And another one was in Kharkiv Oblast, which was also, not done in order to do any defensive rewilding, but in order to stop the adversary. And then nobody rebuilt the dams. And in terms of research, okay, you can still hear me, I hope.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Well, I don't think there are any studies that actually had their equipment during the actual war happening and unfolding. So, unfortunately, we didn't really have the cameras working for a very long time. So we could take this rather short window, which was Russian occupation that lasted 36 days. And then we compared that window in terms of animal activity with the period prior to the invasion when there was zero military activity in the area. So what we found is that, yes, some species react more vigorously, most likely because of their ecology and also their habitat preferences, like red deer that like the open landscapes in central Chernobyl exclusion zone, which has also become an epicenter of all those warfare activities happening during the invasion. Like roe deer was most likely hiding more, and yeah, a few other species reacted in certain ways. What we also did, I think, something that other people didn't, was that we compared the ground-based proxy for warfare activities. So we spread the questionnaire among people whom we considered as to have knowledge about what was happening, particularly during the occupation, in terms of warfare activities, and compared that proxy with the satellite-based data, which was thermal anomalies, which is basically forest fires. And during the occupation, all those forest fires were of human origin, unfortunately. So they were not natural forest fires. And we, I think, managed to prove that, first of all, even in the most hopeless circumstances, there is a teeny tiny hope, no matter what is happening. When you have data both from the ground and from satellites, that is the best case scenario, because satellites, they do capture large scale changes, but they are not able to capture sort of vehicular movements or troops moving in, out, noise. They will not capture that data. So it would be ideal to have this combination of ground-based data and satellite-based data for any specific area, not necessarily a conflict zone, but like other complex environments and particular border zones which may not be accessible for research. So I would consider these points as probably the main points, the main contributions of our work.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think, like, talking about how war impacts the environment, like, we wanted to ask you to explain to our viewers, like, what exactly is ecocide? Like, how genocide is, and most people know about genocide, but most people don't know what ecocide is and what are its impacts on the wildlife and environment. Um, Alexandra, maybe you could start.
So, when we're talking about ecocides, we're not just talking about the destruction of habitats. We're talking about destruction of entire ecosystems. So, for example, in Lebanon, it's a very small country, and despite its size, it lies on the second most important migration route for birds. Well, more than 400 bird species recorded here, 409 specifically, and many of which depend on Lebanon's forests and wetlands and mountains and coastlines to rest and feed during their migration. And when these habitats are burned or contaminated or destroyed, the impact doesn't stop at Lebanon's borders. Obviously, we share these birds with Europe, Africa, and Asia, and it affects these migratory species traveling between those continents, disrupting the ecological network that extends across continents. And wildlife rehabilitation basically allows us to see these impacts one animal at a time with our work, but every injured bird or displaced mammal or burnt reptile is only a small part of a much bigger story, and the real victim of the ecocide is the ecosystem itself. So the most horrible thing that we can experience.
Mm.
Chris, your thoughts? I think we can't hear Chris again.
Oh. Yeah.
How about now? Yeah. So
Yeah.
do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
The question was that, if you could explain to our viewers what exactly is ecocide and what are the impacts of ecocide on wildlife and the environment.
So I just have a short answer to that. I focus mainly on state politics and conservation. So I think when we answer questions like that, it's really important to separate wildlife from wildlife institutions. So as the South Sudan case shows, that war usually harms wildlife. Conflict usually affects ecosystems. But war and conflict can shape conservation institutions in surprising ways, and those are two separate questions. So in South Sudan case, you had these conservation institutions that survived, and they really shouldn't, because this is a state that's been at war for most of its independence. So it's really sort of surprising that they still exist and they still have some kind of mandate to do conservation, even though if they don't do it very well or in ways that meet international benchmarks. So I would just sort of reframe the question a little bit, but in terms of the sort of the ecological impact directly on ecosystems, that I leave that question for my son, who's studying ecological restoration at university right now. So hire him when he's graduated.
Hannah?
Yeah, I have. What is ecocide? What are the impacts of war on nature? They're extensive. I mean, what we documented in Ukraine was shocking, and I'm sure Svetlana can update on any one of these facts and figures. But we had at the time in 2023 60,000 artillery shells landing on Ukraine daily, impacting wildlife behavior and migratory routes. The Kakhovka reservoir bombing, 28,000 fish died in that, 450 tons of engine oil was spilled in that. The explosives that are landing, so many of them have the potential of not detonating. So combined with the mining that's been going on in Ukraine, 30% of the country is now mined. That's an area twice the size of Portugal, so that's huge. And this is now the most widely mined country in the world. And that has massive impacts for not only the wildlife, the nature, and the people that are trying to conduct conservation today, but also any kind of future impacts on ecotourism or just local people using these nature areas as well. Every single shell that lands has the potential to start fires. There was a huge firestorms in 2024, 2025, where we had record-breaking summer heat and heavy combat, resulting in millions of hectares of natural landscapes being burned, many within just a few kilometers of the front line. The Russian Federation confiscating firefighting equipment, which meant that this situation was worsened. We have heavy military vehicles and war infrastructure causing physical damage to the environment, physical damage to the soils, the plants. We've got pollution from chemicals, fires at industrial sites, damages to water management systems, fuel spills, military equipment degrading. My colleague Katerina, documenting the soil samples, showed that all of these shells that are sort of slowly degrading are leaving lead and arsenic in the soils, and those chemicals stay in the soils for decades and decades. They go into the food supplies, they accumulate in the plants and the animal bodies that are part of that ecosystem. So we're talking about really long-term damage, even if like Svetlana said, it's unlikely that this war is going to end anytime soon, but even if it ended tomorrow, the damages are going to last lifetimes, potentially. So in terms of ecocide, the damages are being documented and they're extensive, and it's so critical, particularly for Europe, because Ukraine harbors 35% of the continent's biodiversity. So it has massive global impacts, what's been going on there over the last 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
If I may add to this
Sure.
as well, we have been also dealing with white phosphorus, which is a war crime, but it's part of our daily life, which raises serious concerns about the long-term damage on the forest and the soil and the ecosystem. So combine that with the widespread of wildfires and habitat destruction that followed all of this, it's a disaster for our ecosystems.
I don't know if Svetlana is still connected, but yeah,
yes,
yeah, awesome.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, yes.
Well, I think Alexandra and Johanna have already covered a lot. And I totally agree with what has been mentioned about ecocide. And well, I haven't been collecting those samples in terms of toxins related to toxins, but like modern conflicts, and I'm talking about interstate conflicts, because if we are thinking about intrastate, like internal conflicts that don't last long, and the both sides, they don't really have massive amounts of weapons, and they don't have advanced remotely operated weapons that can destroy large areas. Those conflicts are less likely to have overwhelmingly devastating impacts. But if we are talking about two advanced armies using everything at their disposal, then we have the ecocides that are happening. But the ecocides, they started thousands of years ago, and it was just called scorched earth, or then later during the Second World War, drowned earth, as it was happening in the Netherlands. Um, and that was actually also happening in 2023 with the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, and the dam was destroyed, and also again in 2022 when the dam is destroyed in order to drown a specific area in order to stop the adversary. And the scorched earth was ironically, and maybe I'm not very precise, but that's the case that I know, and maybe there were also other cases from before. But ironically, the first case was during the war between the Persians' advancement in southern Ukraine. So there was war, like the battles between the Scythian tribes living in southern Ukraine at the moment, but sort of along on the coast of the Black Sea and further north, and between the advancing Persian army. And the Scythians approach used the tactics of scorched earth. So you basically create a desert, you destroy the wells. So the army, the advancing army that is following you, has no means to survive in the landscape. But that was called scorched earth, like in just throughout the history, and at those times. Nowadays, basically called ecocide. So as you can imagine, we were quite inventive in destroying the environment in order to stop the adversary, and thinking about tactical results, not thinking that much about strategical results, which is of course sometimes justified. Yeah. So I totally agree that the impacts will multiply, and like if I think about my home country, I guess the only positive impact is that the hunting was banned across the entire country, and it most likely had some positive impact on wildlife species that were hunted. But again, it's like for those species that inhabit the areas far from the front line and far from the border zone. I don't know also about the Carpathians, which is one of the sort of most biodiverse areas in the country, and which has now also experienced quite a lot of disturbance, as people cannot go to in those numbers to the Black Sea during summer. So of course they turn their heads to the Carpathians. But if we talk about the central part of the country and so those areas, countryside, that is not that heavily impacted by air raids, like big cities such as Kyiv or Dnipro, Kharkiv, then most likely this hunt ban hunting ban had a positive impact, but that's basically it. That's the only positive impact of warfare I can think about. Like all the others are overwhelmingly negative, and they will have consequences. Will last for decades or hundreds of years, most likely.
Um, I think one of the things that is worth discussing again, as we prefaced the show by saying, the plight of animals and nature is not often taken into account. I think one of the questions that worth discussing is obviously, genocide is a terrible war crime that is prosecuted in the International Court of Law. Is there a similar thought amongst the community, at least? I don't know governments are at all thinking about it or not, but is there a similar consensus amongst the communities that there should be some kind of repercussions for ecocide, or some sort of framework to actually at least hold people accountable for ecocide, or are people thinking about it? Maybe Chris, you can start this one if you have any thoughts.
I'm pretty sure that in international humanitarian law, scorched earth tactics are a violation of the Geneva Conventions. So there already is some basic provisions that address the use of chemical weapons, biological weapons, indiscriminate weapons, landmines, as weapons that fundamentally disrupt ecosystems and wildlife. In terms of having a sort of a common convention that's similar to the genocide convention that codifies wildlife crimes is something that isn't just this fragmented thing across different legal instruments. I'm not really sure. I mean, I think for most of it, if you're going to talk about the word you're using is ecocide, I think it's mainly framed at the moment as if you destroy support systems for humans, right? So agricultural systems, water treatment systems, all those types of things. So for example, again, I'm about to talk about politics. A concern happening in the war in Iran right now is whether or not water desalination plants will be targets. That's a violation of international humanitarian law. And it probably will have, if it ever happens, I hope it doesn't, will have huge impacts on these natural ecosystems as well. But I think it's pretty human centric the way that the laws are set up now.
Right.
I can add to that. As
Sure.
Chris said, yes, there are laws and regulations that prohibit the use, and there's fines that are being paid by those countries committing those crimes. But to give an example about what happened in Lebanon in 2006, the use of chemicals during the war caused a huge marine life destruction, and the impact was incredible. But the focus of the government wasn't on the marine life itself. It was because the fishermen didn't have livelihood anymore because of what happened. So the fine that was paid to sustain the damage that was done was not put back into conservation or into protecting marine life or anything like that. It was completely to something different. So unfortunately, even though our marine life got very, very affected, it was the people that are using marine life for their livelihood are the ones who basically took money out of this. So wildlife was once again pushed aside.
Hannah, any thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm not as up to date as I should be on the ecocide movement. I mean, I know there's been a lot of work done in Ukraine to try to get it kind of at least put into as a domestic framework on what ecocide means. I think the term actually has existed in Ukraine for a long time, like since the 90s. But I will say this, and I agreed with Christopher regarding a lot of it being very human centric. And I think it would be great to see a more kind of biodiversity rights approach being placed on ecocide and looking at it more from a perspective of biodiversity rights. My colleague Nigel Dudley recently wrote a book on biodiversity rights, reconciling like the ideas of animal rights and human rights with ecological rights. So I think that would be really interesting to see that kind of like an update on that.
Mm. Mm. And Svetlana, did you have any thoughts?
Well, I only know that researchers in Ukraine are collecting evidence of intentional environmental destruction, and like how this evidence, the collected evidence, would be used later. And of course, there are some estimates about, I think, like, I don't know, a dozen or something $billion already in terms of impacts of warfare on the environment. But I've not, well, it's sort of outside of my research interests, and I don't think I have really something to add. So, except for the fact that, yeah, some researchers, they continue collecting the evidence, and thanks to the satellite data, a lot of things can be done remotely, so you don't necessarily need to go to the area. And then there is plenty of data from before the war, so at least at the landscape level, it's not that complicated to get the results without going to the area. But in terms of the actual, let's say, wildlife numbers, or like what is actually happening on the ground, that is more complicated. And of course, more research is needed to evaluate, to have better estimates.
I mean, I think all the insights and all the discussions have been really, something that's been very eye opening. We have more topics which are slightly lighter than the heavier topics we have done so far. So I think one of the things that happens with wars, and it's one of the unintended consequences of a war that's already happened, is that it creates demilitarized zones, and these demilitarized zones, are wildlife havens or a refuge for wildlife. How exactly do the animals move or flourish there? Like, what signals the animals that this is now an abandoned space? I think, Svetlana, it would be quite relevant for you to start this topic.
Well, as I just mentioned before, that more than like large-scale conflicts, as the war, the Russian invasion and Russian war against Ukraine demonstrates, those areas are devastating for the wildlife, the mined areas, and they will de facto all those toxins that are in the mine and that are also linked to the deployment of landmines, will last for decades. Plus, there are quite a lot of things that depend on what type of mines is deployed within a certain areas, and how many are there. Plus, and that's something I've heard from a person who's from South Korea, and naturally I asked after to do. Like my main questions were about the Korean Demilitarized Zone, but which I think quite a lot of you have heard. That landmines deployed there, even though the area indeed was undergoing rewilding and some rare species have recolonized the area. But landmines, they don't just sit where you put them. They are able to migrate if the area is flooded. if there are heavy storms, if there are heavy rains. So they move the landmines to new positions. Then all the weather conditions, they eventually destroy the caskets. They destroy the covering. Um, and then the plants, they activate, detonate the mines, deployed close, particularly close to, let's say, trees or tree root system. Then animals activate those landmines. So, I mean, that person with whom I talked to about the Korean demilitarized zone said that the effects of landmined areas are overwhelming and negative. Even though we think that, oh, maybe people don't go there and then the animals can somehow sneak between the mines. No. Landmined areas have negative effects predominantly, full stop. And that's also something that I have heard about the landmined areas in Ukraine, that unfortunately they cause a lot of fatalities and injuries among wildlife. And for instance, when it comes to putting the Russians use the tactics of putting two types of landmines in one place in order to increase the number of fatalities. So usually anti-personnel mine gets activated when something heavier than around 50 kilos steps on it, while anti-vehicular mine gets activated when something heavier, at least as heavy as 300 kilos, that steps on it or moves it somehow. And what they did is that they put the anti-vehicular mine and then on top of anti-personnel mine, and then on top of that, an anti-vehicular mine, which means that once an animal as heavy as, for instance, an endangered Kowalski horse steps on the anti-vehicular mine, it activates both mines. But also the roe deer, which is not that heavy, it's still able to activate both mines because they are sort of layering, which is again another case of ecocide, because it's clear that such deployments are done deliberately in order to increase fatalities both among the humans and also among wildlife. So yes, unfortunately, I don't have good news about the mined areas based on what I've heard and what I've observed. Maybe there are some other cases that are more positive and optimistic.
Hannah, I know that you have worked with rangers. Is there a case where rangers have to venture into these DMZs, especially because there are animals there or anything along those lines? And is there any safety concerns there in the DMZs, if at all they are venturing into those DMZs, these rangers?
Yeah, absolutely. Huge safety concerns. I mean, I think we have to always be careful about separating human beings off from conservation. I mean, on the one hand, there are demilitarized zones, between North and South Korea, the green belt that runs through the old Iron Curtain through Europe, where you do have wildlife reestablishing, nature coming back, and areas rewilding. But as Svetlana was just sort of saying, like the overwhelming consequences of these mined areas, and I think we need to think about mined areas in the same way as we think about areas that have been impacted by chemicals from war and heavy metals. These are areas that can no longer really be utilized properly by people. I think we have to be very careful about separating human beings off from conservation. Conservation is human beings, it is people, it is rangers. And if rangers can't access these areas, they can't properly protect them from invasive species, they can't properly protect them from fires. and that poses risks to the ecosystems there. I will say I will give one quite dark and kind of funny story though. I have. Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay. I will give a dark and funny story from, not a very funny story, but quite a dark story from Mozambique, where I heard that there are vultures that were using the mined areas, had identified where the mined areas were, and had learned to wait for antelope to come along and detonate the mined areas. Have like a pre-pulverized meal for themselves, which is quite dark, but very clever of the vultures, I have to say.
Yeah, that is a unique display of cleverness from the vultures.
Chris
Alexandra,
and,
maybe?
yeah. Or Chris.
Do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah.
Sure. I think what I asked was, what we asked were like these DMZs often can become like sanctuaries and havens for animals, and we have reported a couple of stories on that, especially as Svetlana was saying, South Korea, etc., and even I think U.S.-Mexico border. So just wanting to understand if they are at all looked as should be looked as a safe haven, and sort of the risks and I guess other features associated with DMZs. Yeah, that was sort of our question. Yeah.
Well, this is a little bit outside my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, protected areas are DMZs, but they're not. They don't usually function that way because they can be part of conflict dynamics, especially because they're usually in the continent where I study. They are shared borderlands. And the temptation is to look at them like places where they can flourish. I mean, so the Korean DMZ is a fascinating example because conflict can accidentally create refuge for wildlife by keeping people out. But I think we have to be careful not to confuse an absence of people with successful conservation. The DMZ exists because of a frozen military conflict, and it's heavily mined and militarized, and it's a reminder that war can produce ecological silver linings in very specific places, but it's different. I mean, I don't think anyone's saying that war is good for conservation here. The real lesson from the DMZ is that human pressure often matters more than warfare itself sometimes, and wildlife can benefit maybe periodically from reduced human access, but long-term conservation still depends on stable institutions to guarantee conservation once the conflict ends. The obverse of that, of course, is when protected areas during active conflict zones where the ecological destruction isn't sort of a side effect of conflict, but was when conservation resources are used and sucked into the political economy of conflict itself. So, we talk a lot about poaching, poaching the big trophy animals like elephants and rhinos, but in places like Eastern DRC, for example, it's really fisheries and forest resources, the charcoal trade, and bushmeat trafficking that are the big drivers of the local political economies that actually have transnational linkages. And it's armed groups on the ground that end up benefiting from these arrangements. And these are some of the challenges that conservation have in countries like Congo.
Alexandra?
To add on what Chris said, I think this takes the conversation to the silver lining topic. So basically, nature is incredibly resilient, but some ecosystems may recover over time, but that recovery happens despite the war, not because of it. So yeah, there is no silver lining in this. But to go back to the landmines how we're dealing with it. We still have areas contaminated with landmines from conflicts that happened decades ago, and they continue to affect cultivation today. So, as Silvana was saying, the clearing of minefields is a long, difficult process, and even after years of work, some areas remain unsafe. And natural changes to the landscape, such as erosions, heavy rainfall, or flooding, these all can shift where those mines are, making them even more unpredictable. But we've experienced this firsthand during one of our rescues. We were trying to save a jackal that has been trapped with a water bucket on its head for 7 days, and when we went to try to capture her to be able to rescue, she unfortunately ran into one of those areas that we would not be able to cross. So it had to take us a couple more days, keeping her life in danger, for us not to be walking in those dangerous areas. Simply because we had no place for us to follow safely. On other occasions, we responded to a wildfire, knowing that there were tortoises, chameleons, and many other animals trapped inside from the fire. But we were stopped by the civil defense because the area was contaminated with landmines. So we had to basically stand back and watch the habitat get burned, knowing that there was nothing that we could safely do. And long after the war ends, wildlife and the people trying to protect it are still living the consequences, basically. So sometimes the hardest part isn't finding an animal that needs help in our job. It's knowing that that animal where it exactly is, and knowing that you can not really safely reach it. So it leaves us kind of hopeless in some cases.
I think that's a really, I guess, very useful and eye-opening perspective for us and our audience. I think mostly in the media, even the conservation-focused media, the reports have portrayed these demilitarized zones, especially like the mine zones, when there's an absence of humans, basically, as Chris was saying, has been portrayed as a little bit of a silver lining where these animals are able to thrive. So I think it's very eye-opening that it is far from that, that portrayal.
Because our follow-up question was going to be about the casualties, because we've only seen like positive news about the demilitarized zones, about how animals are flourishing there. So it's great that you guys have brought that to light, that it's not as great as it sounds, and because we really wanted to know how the animals were avoiding the mines, because we were like, okay, maybe they have some skills that we don't have, but right now you've told us the reality of that entire thing. So that's quite shocking to know that the media would just paint this as a silver lining, but yeah.
Is there any numbers on any sort of animal casualties in those zones or anything like that? Any of you? Cool.
We
sorry.
for numbers, it's not for wildlife. It's not as highlighted as it needs to be. So I don't have the numbers. But when it comes to farm animals, like cows, sheep, and those numbers, we know that there's a lot of casualties and a lot of complaints from the farmers, because maybe because of the heavy weight of them, this is what triggers more, and this is why we're seeing more of it. But yeah, the numbers are huge, unfortunately, when it comes to domestic farm animals.
Another area, I think, again, it's a sort of segue to that area. It's not directly related to conflict. Maybe Hannah can lead this once till we wait for Svetlana to join. Areas like Chernobyl, it's not exactly sort of a conflict area, but again, it has the same features of a post-conflict area. That the Chernobyl area has been sort of portrayed in popular media as well as sort of documentaries by David Attenborough and the likes as this very safe haven for these foxes and other animals, and how animals have come back there and thriving there and things like that. Any sort of insight on sort of the radiation effects on these animals, or do they possess certain bodily functions that can sort of effectively negate the effects of radiation, or what's the situation in sort of that area, that side of things as well in Chernobyl? Hannah, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't think I have any insight on how radiation has affected. That would be much more Svetlana. But I will say this. I think one of the early things that happened during the invasion was that when the Russian forces came through Chernobyl, they churned up a lot of the earth that had been settled in Chernobyl for decades. And I think that's quite seriously injured a lot of the Russian troops. I think they suffered a lot of radiation poisoning from that. Obviously, that then all goes into the water supplies. That's deeply concerning for the people that are, living downstream from those areas. But yeah, as far as wildlife being infected by radiation poisoning, I'm not sure.
Svetlana, do you have any thoughts on that? Sort of how wildlife, and is the portrayal in the media correct? That is also a question. Like, is the portrayal of animals thriving in the Chernobyl region correct, or does it need some more nuance?
Well, it basically demonstrated what was shown also in other areas. So once you eradicate basically humans and disturbance, either lethal or non-lethal, yeah, nature manages to thrive eventually, despite of all the contaminants that are in the area. But unfortunately, after the invasion and even after the deoccupation, the area has become highly militarized, and we, I think, may call it an end for the rewilding chapter. So the rewilding chapter that started a few years or soon after the catastrophe happened, I think is over, because the militarization brought all the human disturbance, or to a certain extent, the disturbance, lethal and non-lethal, because you should not forget the road kills and unintentional kills due to barbed wire fences in the area, like all those disturbances that have been gradually eliminated from the area since the catastrophe. But so partly that was true, that the nature was thriving in the area despite of all the contaminants. But that chapter, I think, is over. But that's my subjective opinion, based on
Right.
the visits to the area before and after the occupation. And in terms of the effect of radioactive contamination, well, that's a very difficult question once you get when people ask about Chernobyl. There were some studies on quite a few species, and in order to single out the effect of radioactive contamination, you need to control as many other factors as possible that may contribute to animals' survival and well-being. And in order to do that, it's the sort of the most transparent way is to do the experiments. In order to, you basically take, for instance, mice or other sort of small-sized species, and then you feed them with food that is contaminated, and then you have a control group. So that's the sort of the best way. And as you can imagine, it's not that possible for large-sized animals like moose or wolves or lynx. And therefore, some researchers in 2010, around 2010, 2015, they, for instance, deployed camera traps along the gradient of radioactive contamination. And you can Google studies by Sahi Hashtak and also Sarah Webster together with James Beasley from the States. But they didn't seem to find any dependency, any association related to radioactive contamination. So it doesn't seem that animals have a specific sensor that signals them that don't go into that area because it's highly contaminated. What they follow is food availability or prey availability, and whether a specific area provides a nice refuge either for a daybed or for, you know, for a den or whatever they need for. So if the area provides nice cover and enough food. So these are the main factors. They don't really care if the area is contaminated or not.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Alexandra or Chris, do you want to add or?
Cool.
No, nothing to add here.
Cool.
Okay. I think this is probably going to be more about like the role of public, like our yeah. Yes, Svetlana.
Do you think I can sort of say goodbye and then leave because it's already like quite late and I really
Sure.
need to get up early.
Sure. Thank you for
Yeah,
staying for
so probably.
thank you for staying for the demilitarized zones topics because I think that was more
Yeah.
that was something we needed to talk about. And
Okay.
yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for inviting.
Yes.
Sorry for the complications related.
No
to
worries.
all the
No
training.
worries.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Hannah also had to leave us because it's equally late for Hannah. Hannah and Svetlana are in the same time zones where it's late for them. Alexandra and Christopher, we will cover the rest of the topics as quickly as we can, so we can also let you have your breather after this. But the next set of questions are more about how can we, like you've been in the war zones. Alexandra is in a war zone right now. How can you get like the public from zones which are not torn by the war, like non-war torn areas? How can you get the public from there to effectively engage and to want to, be a part of the conservation or be a part of the projects that are happening in these war-torn areas? Like, how can that community engagement happen?
So I think people often underestimate the difference that they can make during such times. So when there is conflict, conservation teams cannot be everywhere, which means the public often becomes the first link in protecting wildlife. So as simple as reporting an injured wildlife, sharing its location, respecting wildlife, and knowing who to call can make the difference between life and death. So the public doesn't have to rescue wildlife. Sometimes the most important thing they can do is to make sure that the right people can. So just to contact the right people. And conservation begins, in my opinion, with people who choose to care and choose to act. Yeah.
Mm.
I can answer when you said how the situation is in Lebanon. Unfortunately, awareness is very much needed here, and human wildlife conflict exists in areas where it's the most devastating. So, for example, you have people who have encountered wolves, and those wolves ate their sheep and whatever, and then the action that was taken is to eradicate all the Arabian wolves that we had in the country. So what happened was now we have an overpopulation of wild boars because that is the only predator that we had, which we killed. So now we're dealing with the consequences of it. But they're not understanding that that's the reason why they have different opinions about everything, and you have people who are very detached. So you have people who live in the city who do not even believe that Lebanon has any sort of wildlife. So if we're posting about a jackal or a hyena, they're like, "Where did you get this out of Google?" We're like, "Where are you serious?" Like, no, we do have wildlife. They just did not see it, so it just does not exist. So how would you convince them to care about protecting those animals if they are not even convinced that they exist around them? We have lost so many animals through the years because of habitat destruction, and the people that are now getting familiar or seeing wildlife is because of how much we have removed of those green areas. So Lebanon used to be 80% green areas. Now we're at 13%, and we are a very, very tiny, tiny country. We're the second tiniest country in the world. So imagine the impact that this had on wildlife. So now we have people saying, "Oh, there's a lot of hyenas. We're seeing so many hyenas. There's so much of them." No, the striped hyena, which is Lebanon's national animal, by the way, it's a vulnerable species. There's less than 10,000 individuals in the wild, and yet we are killing them on a daily basis because, oh my God, we're seeing a lot, so there must be so many of them. And you get this fear and stories that they can hypnotize you and kill babies and go into your homes. And it's so far from the truth. And you try to convince them, yeah, we go to schools, universities, to municipalities and try to raise awareness. But to give you an example of how hard reaching this point is, we have dealt with, I was giving a session for 3,000 kids, and they were coming in batches and going. And I was talking about the striped hyena, how it's a scavenger, it's not a predator, and trying to get that idea that this is the scary monster out of their heads. And then the teacher that was with them, she was like, "Listen, child, you're a city girl. What do you know about animals? Hyenas, they can spray you with their pee. This is real story. If you ask anyone in Lebanon, this is the story that they will tell you. They can spray you with their pee. Their pee is magical, so it will hypnotize you. You wouldn't understand what you're doing, and you would follow them into their den so they can eat you." And she said that in front of all of those children that I've spent like 30 months trying to convince them that hyena doesn't do anything and they're so scared of humans. And then they have their teacher that they see on a daily basis telling them the complete opposite. It just destroyed everything that I was trying to work for. So, and this is generation after generation of inheriting these horrible ideas about wildlife. So there's no connection whatsoever about them. Even when it comes to snakes, all snakes are venomous for Lebanese, and this is not true. We have 27 species of snakes. Only 3 of them are highly venomous, but all snakes get killed once they see a snake. We're killing it, and most snake bites are often on hands and not on feet because it's people trying to kill them. And so it's horrible. We are trying our best to work on awareness and the importance of conservation, but it's extremely difficult. And now with everything happening in the world, people don't see it as a priority at all.
Absolutely, absolutely. We will send out an email with everyone on it, and you can do a whole email chain and then probably stay in touch from there. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Yes. But just Alexandra, just wanted to know, like, because you had this whole story that you were saying, how you have that entire story about the the hyenas and the peeing. Um, how do you think, like, the media, the filmmakers, the scientists, educators, like how you have been educating the students, what exactly can the others in the same sphere, what can they do so that wildlife doesn't become an invisible casualty? Like, how can the talk or the news around them be better so that there is better awareness?
Sure, it's very difficult to try to convince someone about something that they have believed in and they believe in their core since they were children. I was raised on those beliefs as well until I was like, okay, wait, maybe they are not that dangerous. Maybe let's do some research. But not everyone does that, and nor everyone is interested in learning more. The thing is that some animals are being perceived as the villain by movies, like children movies, like The Lion King, for example. The hyena that they showcase is always the hyena. It's the evil ones that trying to kill Simba and Mufasa. And but what we have, even though it's a completely different species, for Lebanese, for example, a hyena is a hyena, whether it's the spotted or the striped or whatever. What they see as hyena, and that is it, and it's a monster for them. So we try our best to say it, to speak it. We try our best whenever we have a hyena under our care to show them on our social media, because their faces are so cute, but people do not see them. So we try to show that side of them while still respecting the rehabilitation part of it, and not using too much social media, because you have the other side of the spectrum where people be like, oh, okay, so I can actually have a hyena as a pet, and that
Hmm.
happens, and you have people who go and trap hyenas or kill the mother so they can keep the cubs, which we've had so many of those confiscated as well. So the perception that they have it's either very very negative where they kill, or very very
Hmm.
positive on the wrong side where they try to get it for themselves, or see it not as wildlife that needs to give us their ecosystem services in the
Hmm.
wild. No, they have it in their home. Is the same for all wildlife trafficking. And
Mm,
what's even more frustrating is when the intentions are actually good. So you have a lot of invasive species also in Lebanon because of people's good intentions that had zero knowledge. So, for example, we have species of local turtles, pond turtles, and you have a lot of red-eared sliders that are invasive to Lebanon, but they are the most common pet that you can find in the country. And every time that they get a bit bigger, the people be like, I'm gonna give it its freedom. So they go to rivers and they just release all of them. And
Oh.
we end up with a severe decline of our local species because of those people who had good intentions in releasing those animals. The same
mm,
with there's something happening now because of war, since this is our topic, that we might not see the effect of it now, but we are so sure that we're gonna see it later. So you have people who have monkeys as pets. We as Lebanon do not have local monkey species.
Hmm.
So when the war happened, a lot of people flooding their homes and leaving their homes, they left their pets behind. And when we're talking about pets, I'm not talking just about cats and dogs. I'm talking about exotic species, including monkeys, including pythons, including different types of birds. Them thinking that they are giving it freedom and the chance for it to survive, while if these animals do survive, they're gonna cause a major environmental impact on the country. So and even if you try to convince them that this is wrong, for them, like, yeah, so what? We know for a fact there's a guy that released 6 monkeys in one of the zones right now. We have had to catch so many monkeys randomly from different areas within the city, not not outside of it. So we are seeing the impact bit by bit, but I'm pretty sure that it's going to be catastrophic down the line. We did, however, try on social media begging people that if you have an exotic pet, please reach out to us, even if you're fleeing the area that you're in. We are willing to foster it, keep it in a safe area until everything settles down. But the number of reach of people who actually did that was very, very minimal. We did help a lot of people, but on the other hand, a lot of people said it was easier to just let them all go because we didn't have time to gather all their stuff. It's very, very frustrating. So education comes first. We have to keep raising awareness, but you also need those people to be accepting of getting this information and following up with it.
That is true. That is true. And I think the last question that we have is, what is the one misconception regarding conservation, especially during war, that you would want to change in public discourse?
So people think once the war is over that everything can be fixed, like, and that's not the end of a war, and it's not the end of the conservation crisis. In many ways, it's the beginning of a new one. So there's a lot of environmental impacts that are happening that we cannot know that they are happening now. That we're only gonna see it down the line. Just like as I said with invasive species, there's a lot of risk for zoonotic diseases increasing as wildlife, domestic animals, and people are forced into closer contact together. There's monitoring and research are being disrupted. So many of these changes may take years to fully understand, and by then the damage may already be difficult to reverse, unfortunately. So yeah, the people saying, if just like now, they think that there are some areas that are very detached. So you think that they do believe that we are in a ceasefire because they try to cover their eyes basically on the areas that are still getting affected, and for them everything is completely normal at the moment. So if they are not in it, and this is something that's human, I think, if you are not getting directly affected, you don't really tend to care. So it's just because you don't see it, it doesn't mean that it's not happening.
I think we discussed this repeatedly, like this sentiment repeatedly when we do our regular shows as well. That unless it's directly affecting me, it's very difficult for to reconcile that. And I mean, in case of animals, it's like few species removed, so it's very, very difficult to reconcile that fact. Yeah,
and I think that's the same. It's the same with like climate change and global warming, like because it's so slow and gradual, most people don't want to believe in it. So until it's not affecting them, like how COVID affected people don't want to make any changes around that. So we do understand how frustrating it can be, but Alexandra, I mean, hats off to your resilience and for what you do for the animals in Lebanon. Thank you for sticking around till the last of the show. I know that it was a very long show, but thank you for just being there, talking to us, giving us your time. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
I can talk about wildlife for days, so don't worry. I enjoyed every single bit of it. So thank you for this opportunity and for listening. And yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. And we hope things are better for you. We hope that there's some reach for you. There are some people who would reach out to you and can help you out. We don't know if we ourselves would want to do more if we can for you, but we're so glad that all four of you could join. Obviously, we cannot address the other three as they can't hear us, but thank you so much for talking about this topic.
And you guys for opening the platform for this. Thank you.
All right. I think King Shuk will transfer you to the other room and just do some post-show formalities before you can carry on with your day or night. But thank you so much.
Thank you once again. Bye, Alexandra.
Bye.
Cool. That was an interesting discussion. Again, this is our first time doing such a show, a panel, and we dealt with some technical challenges. So, yeah, again, hopefully the audience and the listeners will be kind in that regard. But we definitely want to know, your thoughts around that as well. What did you think, Meghna, around the conversation that we sort of had today?
I think it was. I think it was something that we obviously anticipated that it's going to be really heavy.
Mm,
Chris did try to make it light a lot of times, but yeah, like most of the topics and everything that they spoke about, it was very genuine. It was all from experiences, and it was a lot to learn because I think there's so much misconception floating about how conservation is done. During war, after war, it's painted very differently to us, and I think they never really show in the media what the researchers feel or what the animals are actually going through. So especially the demilitarized zones. I mean, all we've seen is like these hunky dory stories,
mm,
and especially even about like war-torn areas. There's not a lot of talk. Like there's a lot of talk about the humans, yes, but there's not a lot of talk about the animals. So it was great to hear from all of them and the research on ground and how it's affecting everything.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, so I think let us know what you think about that. Let us know if we should do more of these. We'll certainly try to work through the technical challenges and things like that. But yeah, do let us know in the comment. Any parting message for our listeners, Meghna?
Yeah, just listen to this episode and let us know how you feel. It's been quite a heavy episode. I don't really have any takeaways or thoughts, but definitely be more aware of the situation of war and what's happening to the wildlife worldwide. Don't just be concerned about your little bubble and your little area. Um, you have to reach out and you have to know and you have to be more aware.
Yeah, and I think hopefully this show can do that for you. And as Alexandra said, like, doing a little bit of Googling, doing a little bit of research on the animals and sort of trying to get out of the misconception zone would be very, very helpful. As always, do subscribe to our channel, and thanks to all the subscribers that have listened to us over the last 1 year. Again, this is our 1 year anniversary. So it's great to be sharing these stories with you guys and bringing these researchers on our show. It has been very exciting 1 year to say the least. Do follow us on all the different social media platforms. We go live everywhere all at once, so you'll be able to catch us wherever you follow us. If you're listening to the recorded version of this episode, do consider leaving us a rating, and that just helps share this message and this, I guess, perspective with more and more people. We'll try to bring more interesting guests and scientists on the show to talk about some pressing issues. But other than that, that's it for today, and we will see you next Sunday, same time, same channel. Have a good one, guys.
Bye bye.